He had information on a drug cartel that they were more interested in, and so they gave him a plea bargain and put him in protective custody based on that information, slapped involuntary manslaughter on him, and sent him off, and he did 2 years and he came out. So now, as a young lady growing up, and again, I put in my bio in regards to education, because somehow along all the trauma, education was always the foundation for me. That's what kind of kept me together. And so then we have the OJ trial. And all of a sudden, after 1994, the laws of domestic violence started to change. So now I'm going back and I'm trying to figure out what happened between that part when my mother didn't get justice, and now you find the wherewithal to change the laws and tighten up for prosecution. And so thinking back to, and I'm doing my research, and I'm looking at how, you know, in the 70s and in the 80s, how women were required to go and do restraining orders and do all of these things in order for the system to even validate their claim of domestic violence. And thinking of how all the families that I've worked with, and even my own trauma, and thinking back to my mother, and I remember one lady saying to me that put so much into perspective, and she said to the district attorney in a whole room of legislative, you know, people, she was like, I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to call family. I just wanted the abuse to stop. And so when you think back to what was required of us to prove being abused, and how we didn't want the involvement, because a lot of women still love their husbands. A lot of them thought about, I don't want to separate my children, or he's the one that's providing the financial stability in the household, or I don't know what it looks like on the other side. And because I'm afraid of what that other side looks like, I'd rather stay here because this is familiar to me. All the pressures that our legal system put upon us, as if we were the ones responsible for being in the situations that we were, and that playing a huge part as to why we didn't tell, and then for those like my mother that did tell and still got no justice. And then all of a sudden, now the laws changed. Now we start talking more about it. And I'm just going to be open and honest. I felt like, oh, okay, so now all of a sudden a black man killed a white woman. Now we want to talk about it. But where was the justice when this black man killed this black woman? And that's where I began to learn about the history of domestic violence and how we were groomed up to this point to have these conversations.
And now we're in 2018, and much haven't changed. I get phone calls all the time dealing with women in very crazy situations, and it's sort of the biggest thing I find out, and this is phone calls by me being the NACP vice president. Sometimes they will call us because they feel that we would listen to them. And one of the things that I'm noticing the trend is that if you do not have resources, and we're talking about economics, money, it's hard to leave. And when you try to leave, you got to pay first and last rent. And often when you give them resources, people to call and stuff, it's a list you have to get on. It's very discouraging for women. And some of them just, you know, like you say, okay, there's shelters they could go to. A lot of women feel too embarrassed and too ashamed to go to a shelter, or they have had bad experiences within the system thinking someone's going to take their children from them. And they want to keep their children with them because they feel like if they get in the system, it's going to be very difficult to get them back. So it's a lot of factors there that factors in, and it's always, well, why didn't you report it? Why didn't you leave? You know, those questions are very complicated questions, and if we really want to help, we have to look at the culture of domestic violence that ties into sex trafficking and all this all the things are happening to people that are just, it just makes you want to cry all day and night long. And sometimes people even go, I know I'm jumping around because my heart is just full. Sometimes people will go to the church, but the churches, many of them, are not equipped to deal with the complicated situation, or don't have funds to help. And so it's like, what do? You know, you're like stuck, and with all these things are happening to you. And the deal is this, women are so vulnerable, even when they walk the street, because they don't have transportation, the bus stop at a certain time, like college students. Often my youth and college kids, I would pick them up. This is what I do on my own gas, because the buses have stopped and they're somewhere. I said, where are you? And they said, I'm scared, somebody looking at me. I'll be right there. This happened just the other night. The young lady was waiting, and she felt so uncomfortable. She called. We have that kind of relationship. I went and picked her up and made sure she was safe. I mean, that kind of thing is going on. She's trying to better herself, go to school, and she doesn't have money to stay in the dormitory, so she's trying to get home and stuff, and the buses are late coming, and we're talking nighttime, and people seeing a young lady by herself, and what they think, oh, I could take advantage of her.
Right. It seems that for me, especially in the investigation of these cases, because I mean, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and you know what I've noticed, especially when individuals are in a situation, it's a very difficult situation when you have someone, because it's a balance of the rights of the accused versus the victim. And you know what I've noticed, at least from my perspective, is that what really throws me back when I look at those investigations is the lack of effort on, sometimes, I'm not talking all the time, but oftentimes there's a lack of effort on the part of law enforcement. And so what happens is that basically you're representing somebody, and you know you're going to trial, and what happens is the law enforcement, whether they're not equipped or whether it's because of lack of their interest in the case, don't do a very good case of speaking with the victim, verifying, even I've had situations where victims had been, subjected to something at a particular location. I mean, something is as simple as their grandmother's house. And we get all the way to trial, and you'll find that the officer, there's potential witnesses, they never spoke with them. They never go to the homes to even speak. You'll ask a simple question. You'll say, did you go to the home where the incident took place? No, I never went to the home. Do you even know whether a home even exists there? No. And so what you've done is you basically, because of that lack of investigation and the interest in that particular victim, oftentimes it's because of oftentimes I ask the question is, obviously, the person has a right to a fair and impartial trial and they're presumed to be innocent. But then you're asking the question is, why wouldn't someone go to the extent of doing the appropriate investigation? They're getting calls. I've had situations where there was a situation where the clothing and everything was taken at that moment, and they waited so long to send the clothing to the lab that they couldn't even use it. So it seems like to me, and I know that you talked about earlier about the issue where we sometimes see that there are disparities in the way that individuals investigate these cases and the type of attention sometimes that victims get. And to me, I think it is obvious. I think that when you're talking about, it's clearly racial in many instances, and also it's also economic too.
Well, I mean, so we're talking about, of course, a multi-layered situation, a multi-layered problem, because you're also talking about the culture of the police department and the abuse that is intermingled and shared within that family. But the bigger thing that I pay attention to, not only on top of incompetency, when a person who is sworn in and supposed to have knowledge of how to investigate and do all these things. But we're also talking about a lack of psychoeducation and overall knowledge. It baffles me how many service providers, district attorneys, lawyers, social workers, police officers, gang injunction, all of these different people that are here to be the intervention for a family or individual that has experienced trauma, and to find out that a good number and percentage of them do not have extensive training, let alone beyond basic training on domestic violence or sexual assault. They don't know that. Mm-hmm. And so how are you having people work with populations who are plagued with these types of experiences, and you don't know different types of domestic violence, you don't know what entails that, you don't know any statistics, you don't know behaviors, you don't know any of these things. And that is a big problem. So when you talk about officers coming out and how they respond to certain situations, my question is, how many of those officers that have responded to my household, and a lot of them that were nice and that were trying to be an intervention to our household, how many of them actually had taken classes on domestic violence? Mm-hmm. How many of them knew how to process?
Yeah, I'll be the first to tell you that, there's a lot of things in life I know for me, that you really don't pay attention to until you hear about them or you see them. And, I can go back to, to hearing the terminology Spanish fly using years ago, mm-hmm. and it wasn't like something that was illegal, or something that seemed like it was acceptable amongst the individual, because we used to hear about the parties. But I think when the terminology changed in later years to date rape job, mm-hmm. that's when it became, attention started to, people started to pay attention to these types of things that people were actually using. And like I say, this subject matter right here, just sitting here listening, it's enlightened me about a lot, as well as just hearing about a lot of the things that's been going on in the news lately with Judge Kavanaugh, Bill Cosby, the priest. And it has led to conversation in my household, to where my wife, we found ourselves sitting down talking to our children saying, if someone tell you, don't tell nobody, 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, you're supposed to tell somebody. Because when they tell you don't tell somebody, then that means that they're telling you to keep something hidden from your parents. So we have those conversations with our children. But just hearing this conversation, like I say, I can't say that it was the furthest thing from my mind, but just hearing you guys speak about it is one of the things that I will most definitely implement inside of my youth program, with talking to my young ladies as well as my young men. Mm-hmm. It's definitely something that needs to be talked about at an early stage, in their development and stuff like that. I'm certified in first aid and mental health and stuff like that, but when it comes down to abuse, that's something that's, that I haven't been trained in, but it's most definitely something that I'm most definitely going to look into doing now.
That's why I write plays about it, because lecturing kids don't like that. They're, oh, here you go again. Mm-hmm. But when they can see it and see people their age doing it, then that brings it to life. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm going to need everyone here to help me fill up that place, because I'm on a shoestring budget. God is coming from my heart, The city of Riverside sponsored it and gave me money so I could get the building. But I have 200 seats Friday at 7, Saturday at 7, and 3 o'clock on Sunday, and that's October the 12th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. And I really would like the youth to come. If they need I don't have money, you give me their names. I'll let them come free. Because it's not about anything other than awareness. We got to stop this madness. And so that's why all the actors, nobody's getting paid, musicians, beautiful singing and gospel music. We got some great talent. We just got to now bring the people in. And so if you're with a youth group, ministers out there, call in. They have my contact information. Let's pack this place, because, we each have a responsibility to do something. We know that it's power and strength in numbers. We could talk about it. It's time to do something about it.
Right. Yeah. How much are the tickets?
The tickets are $20.
Okay.
Okay.
And where are they available?
Oh, they're available on the NAACP Riverside Branch website, you could buy them there. But but if people have youth groups, let's work out something, because I want the youth there, because I want them to see it, because we have this young guy and he's so convinced as they could see, because he's so handsome in his presentation and how he talked to these girls, and so they could see, oh, he's the bad guy. Because often now, let's talk about sexual trafficking. We got young men that looks like college students going on those campuses and getting these young ladies who's lonely because they're away from home, and they're getting them out there and preparing them to be part of their stock. This is real deal, and it's happening in the IE.
But not only that, I mean, you have other females.
Yes,
I mean, because I know we take
it.
focus on the guys, but you have other females
Yes.
that go into these homes,
Yep,
and they're there to groom as well.
that's right.
Well, I think and it's good information, but we really got to go much deeper.
Yeah.
We have got to start concentrating on root causes as opposed to symptoms. See,
Yes.
you know, when you look at violence and when you look at people who use domestic violence to harm, hurt, etc., that is the symptom of something tangibly that's imbalanced. This
underlying-
society, and when you look at where we are right now, we are not dealing with the traumatized, dysfunctional mindset of our people in general. That's why you see the mass shootings. That's why you see people terminating their children. That's why you see a plethora of violence like we never seen before. So in understanding that, the domestic violence perpetrator has some type of damage that has constituted him using a dysfunctional way to achieve that end result that either he or she wants. So we've got to look at the role stress plays, which, if not checked, causes distress. If not checked to distress, it causes crisis. Trauma develops from crisis in the intersection of distress. And as we continue to allow the marginalized communities, for the most part, and when I say marginalized, I'm talking about people that don't feel that they have a just opportunity to achieve that level of greatness. If we do not deal with that, these individuals are going to continuously find alternate routes to achieve some degree of satisfaction in life. Now, on the flip side of that, we cannot wait, and I think the sister said it so well, when you look at police officers who are suppression driven, when you look at crisis responders, you have to get people who understand the normality of the domestic violence mindset as well as the perpetrator and the victim of that. You cannot engage or bake a cake and hopefully be successful with that cake by watching a book picture that says to bake a cake. You know, it's an old African saying, in order to be a good tree trimmer, you got to cut a tree. Same thing with domestic violence, same thing with the trauma of domestic violence. You got to feel it, you got to take your hands off, and you got to get in it. Now, lastly, I would say, from a solutionary standpoint, we've got to realize those of us that are in this, and those of us that understand it, we are going to be our own best result or reserve. We've got to look at short-term situations, and then we got to create long-term stability with infrastructure that can create some type of stability once we get these solutions and answers at the table. So what we need to be creating is we need to be creating networks of domestic violence victims who are able to reinforce and create that resiliency. There should be ongoing training within that structure. There should be physical training, there should be psychological training, and there should be economic regenerators that are going to get these people the ability to move themselves out of that situation. We've got real work today. We've got to stop concentrating on the exterior symptoms and get to these dang root causes if we're going to change the dynamic of what we see going on in the society today.
Now, for myself, you know, and you speak in my language now, because we've always talked about on the surface trauma, but there are underlying needs and things that have caused, you know, these behaviors. And so
That's right.
I believe that's why God led me to the work that I do now, because I'm working with parents. You know, when they ask me, do you want to work with the children or you want to work with the parents? I said the parents. Why? Because I'm a firm believer that a great percentage of our clients, which are children, are in our agency because of the result of indirect or direct experience of trauma through their parents. You want to talk about behavior. You want to talk about grooming. Years ago, that when we sat on a panel together at the African American Firefighter Museum and we were talking about domestic violence, I was just introducing myself to the topic of gestational exposure to trauma. I was just talking about how a mother carrying a child being exposed or engaged into violent behaviors, and how that child, even though that child is in her womb, is experienced to trauma, is exposed to trauma, how that baby comes out. Then we're talking about the first 5 years of a child's life and the importance, and to be honest, the first 7 years, because that is the most critical part of a child still being groomed. They're still spongy. So learning what healthy general development looks like, as opposed to what our children have been experiencing, and trying to make adjustments and correction, not only through education but modeling behaviors, so we begin to now protect our children and teach our children and build that trust and that autonomy and that industry in them, so they have a healthy sense of attachment and going out into the world and being able to form relationships with children, with people. Test scores in our schools at 3rd grade, we know when a child is exposed to that type of trauma based on test scores. But no, instead of paying the money to intervene at that point, we continue letting them go through it to have a prison waiting on them on the other side. So what I'm saying is that in terms of a solution is the reason why I do the work that I do, because I'm into stepping in and intervening to a parent that is willing and that is ready to receive the information and say, listen, I understand, I'm not blaming, I'm not shaming, I'm not pointing the finger. However, based on what you shared with me, this is what's happening. Now we got to stop it. How do we stop it? Okay, let's take one day at a time, focusing on what behaviors you can change to be able to bring about healing in your household.
Yeah.
The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Wow.
Well, there you have it.
And I feel like going back to the whole normality argument, I feel like it's really hard to understand normality nowadays because, the normality of rape victims and domestic violence victims, because we live in such a sexualized culture where the dialogue doesn't really involve hearing about the testimony of people who have undergone through these circumstances, but it really involves the dialogue of objectifying women, be it through music, be it through TV, be it through movies. Our culture has normalized violence and rape. And our women are always seen at fault because perpetrators are only seen as doing what this society has imposed upon everyone, which is objectifying women. And and I feel like going back to Mrs. Webb's argument as to how she associated sex with love, I think, like I said, we live in a sexualized culture that has really created a mental health crisis in our youth, where it's a cycle that begins, at the home with absent fathers, low-income households, where laws fail to favor these households, and these media portrayals kind of really influence our young girls and our young men. And overall, we grow up objectifying women, because if you drive right now out of here, you will see billboards with a woman that's sexualized. And a lot of these women do actually also find their validation in society, in the media, in TV, and these young men as well. They validate themselves through these movies, through these YouTube videos, through these music videos that talk about sex and how cool it is to, rape women, or how cool it is to sexualize or objectify a woman.
Body types, the new epidemic of, body shaping in terms of, getting a bigger behind, or, having a smaller waist. And you have women that are actually cracking, they're having their ribs cracked so they can have smaller waists. It's so many different things that,
Station ID.
okay.
Okay, we'll be right back.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
Thank you for rejoining us at Justice Watch, and we in the middle of this really interesting conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about where we're seeing, I think that the Judge Kavanaugh confirmation issue, or the attempt to confirm him, is really important, because I think that we're really getting a really good dose of exactly how our society sees individuals who are actually coming out and making. Number one, you clearly are seeing a woman who is basically, in many ways, being victimized just for the fact that she actually came out. And then you have a significant number of individuals, and I'm talking about men and women, who are actually trying to vilify Dr. Ford and the other individuals who are coming out against some of the things that Judge Kavanaugh had done. And now, because of, as you say, they're going to, it's a traumatic experience. And oftentimes, and what I've seen with individuals who are facing traumatic experiences, especially when it comes to even things that actually happen even recent, you're talking about individuals who may not be able to call specific details, because that's the part of trauma. That's what it means. And so nobody's even taking those issues into consideration. And that's what happens in a court of law. If you're asked, if you forget one detail about what happened, then you're going to be called a liar. Why can't you remember that? Or what were you doing at that party? Or why were you drinking? Why were you wearing that? Why did you go to that room? You're going to be asked those questions, and if you're not able to stand up to that scrutiny, because it doesn't end by making the allegation. That's the beginning of it. Once you make the allegation, they're going to you're going to be drugged through the coals. Not only sometimes by law enforcement, but you're going to have to be put on the stand. You're going to have to be asked certain questions. You're going to have to disclose very personal details on the witness stand. Now, what happens oftentimes is that we're not all, perfect individuals. So everything that you've ever done bad is going to come out. Somebody's going to investigate everything that you've ever done. If you've had relationship with other individuals, that's fair game. And so to help them show that there was some sort of consent on your part. And so I think that when you begin to start considering the fact that you're taking someone and their life will never be the same. Number one, it's not going to be the same because you've been subjected to that traumatic experience. But also, we've seen with Dr. Ford, who is obviously an accomplished woman. She's not going to get anything out of this. But you've taken someone like that who is well educated, has a degree, and they're dragging her through the coals, and she's not even in criminal court yet. And they're attacking her and talking about how terrible a person, how she can't remember, as if she's a bad person. And the person, Judge Kavanaugh hasn't really had to been held to the same scrutiny, I believe, in my personal opinion, that she's been held to. Now, it's almost like we've changed the focus from the person who's done, and this is the way it happens. I mean, this is like a microcosm, or really like a great metaphor as to what really happens when it's right there in front of you. He's actually not he's not the villain. She's literally being put up as actually a villain now. And so you can imagine, we're talking about individuals who are white, who are privileged, who are educated. Can you imagine what happens to someone who is not privileged and who is not educated? Can you imagine what they're put through? And I can tell you, the first hand is that's just the way it is. You're going to be put through, that's what you're going to be put through. And so, it's like we're not learning anything. It's almost like we're living in caveman days when you hear some of the rhetoric by people based upon their political leanings as to how they're going to treat this individual who's doing nothing but just coming out and didn't even really want to come out, and now she's center stage, and everything that she's ever done is clearly going to be scrutinized, and it hasn't stopped, and that's a terrible thing. I mean, and that's something that we all have to consider. Is there an answer to that? I mean, I don't know if it's hard to to figure out ways to educate ignorant people. It's hard to figure out how to educate people who have an agenda. And I'm assuming that if, you know, it's amazing how the political leanings and the attitude of the individual who is attacking her is all dependent upon what they expect to happen and what they expect to come out. So in other words, they don't really care what the truth is.
No.
You know, they really, and that's what happens. That's what really happens in that, you know, it's clearly whenever I can poke holes all day long in someone who makes the allegation. We can. You know what I mean? I mean, because basically there's going to be discrepancies.
I mean, to some degree, it feels like it defeats the purpose for those that are trying the case in the justice system in itself to be educated on psychology, period. Because, like I was also sharing prior to this, this session, how our bodies are designed to protect us. So when you experience trauma, there's often times that your mind shuts down and you cannot remember as if it never happened for protection purposes. Your body understands that you are not ready to handle that. And it's not until something happens in your life, and that can be 20 years from now, that re-triggers that thought. And I even talked about how for years I was having this dream about my molestation, but I thought it was just a dream until my predator re-approached me years later, and that's when I figured out and connected that that wasn't just a dream. It was me subconsciously reliving my experience. And so to know a young lady that was molested by her father, and all of these years she's been around him as if he's done nothing. And it wasn't until he tried to approach one of her children that it triggered, oh my God, all of these years I hear him in my mind, I'm thinking it was some uncle or some family friend that did it to me, it was him. Her mind shut her down from that. So if her mind shut her down from that, then to be questioned in a court of law about accounts, I can't remember. Or maybe in my mind, the person that really did it is sitting before me, but when I'm trying to place a face, that face could be blank in my head. It could be actually attached to somebody else because I don't want to believe, or my senses don't want to believe that my father actually did this. I mean, there's so many different things that play into it. And then the line of questioning. I was 13 years old on a witness stand being questioned, where did he put his penis? How did he put it there? I'm 13 years old, and the expectations were you were having sex, so you must have known. I didn't know. And I didn't know how to, I was afraid to say the word. And so it's all these different mechanisms that play into a person trying to articulate, not only in private, but before others that are scrutinizing what supposedly be the facts, how that re-victimizes the person. And I understand why it has to be done, because you don't want a person to be punished for something they didn't do. But it's the way our system goes about getting information that causes a person to be in silence.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I think Rosa hit on when she was talking about the socialization of our society and the way that we, you know, the way that we portray, you know, I'm going to sound like an old man, and I am an old man. The way that we portray women in our society, you know, is just, you know, unbelievable. I mean, when you're talking about, we talk about entertainment, the way that you look at videos, the fact that it's almost like if you really want to get somewhere in this society as a woman, then you have to do certain things. And that's kind of like the message that we give people. And you know, you have people who are proud of that they say, I'm going to do anything I have to do. They know that I have to, if I have to be eye candy to get somewhere, then I'm going to be eye candy to get somewhere. If I'm going to be, and that's how we do it when it comes to, you know, jobs, when it comes to promotions, when it comes to so many different things. You know, there's been studies that talk about appearances of women. Women that look a certain way are actually going to, you know, go certain places just simply because they're using their body. That's how we do it. We've been socialized that way. And so when it comes to individuals, when they're getting, you know, accused of certain things, I think that some people really believe that it's okay. I really believe that you're talking you're really talking on deaf ears. And I think that until we get to a point where, you know, as a culture and as a society, and especially, you know, we can't change everybody, but I'm always, you know, I'm a father of 4 daughters, and I'm a grandfather of 2 granddaughters. And so, you know, for me, you know, I have no sons. I have a grandson that's 2 years old. So I was surrounded by women. And looking at my daughters and trying to teach my daughters and trying to teach them the whole idea, as you were saying, the game, and letting them know that basically this is how it really works. This is you're going to be entering this society, but you know there may be things that you might have to sacrifice. But my grandfather taught me, when I was a little boy, that it didn't make really any sense to me. He said, son, he says, there's a difference between being liked and respected. And just because somebody likes you does not mean that they respect you.
Absolutely.
Right? So don't worry about people liking you, but you make sure they respect you. And, you know, and regardless of what you have to compromise in order to maintain that respect. And I told my daughters, look, you make sure people understand they're going to have to respect you. They don't have to like you, but make sure they respect you. But we have entered this society where it's like whatever it takes to get there, that's what I'm going to do. And then we've just created this whole mindset among individuals that, you know, the way that we objectify women is horrible. It is absolutely horrible. And we have some of the things that these television stations allow in these music videos to you know what I mean? I mean, and we glorify these people, though.
Yeah.
So in other words, for example, let's just say there's a rapper who they've almost placed them into icon status. And you look at his video and you see how he objectifies all the women in the video, and then oftentimes they are perpetuators of domestic violence. They're perpetuate rape. But how can you take it in when you live in a society where you have a culture where an individual who clearly has no respect for women, objectifies women both by personally being involved in domestic violence and actually rape, and you hold them into icon status, and we don't figure anything is wrong with that. He's the best of all time. Then what do you expect? That is a psychosis that is like unbelievable. But what's unbelievable about it is that the entire community falls for it.
Yeah. You know, I'm involved in a STEM academy. It's for African American youth between the middle school ages, and we have a lot of females in that, and that brings me a lot of joy. But what really bothers me is that years ago, being in a strip club and being a stripper was something that you were ashamed of. But I see a lot of young ladies just talking to young women saying, I want to go there and make some quick money. So rather than, you know, I'm glad that I'm getting them coming giving them another option, using your brain with the Saturday School STEM Academy. But it's a lot of young ladies still out there thinking that, well, I'm seeing what they make because it's all on TV with Love and Hip Hop, and they're thinking like, I want to make some of that. I see how they're dressed, their weave is fly. I want to do that. So going back to what Rosie said about this cultural change that we have to do, and it maybe we each. I still go back to the responsibility of all of us. Yes, in terms of the ills of slavery. You know, like President Obama talked about, still upon us. That's real. A trauma is real. You know, we have all of that. in our family. We all know people that done something or incarcerated or some stuff is going on and jumping off as we speak. But still, we have to do this cultural thing. We have to have that pride. We have to have programs that's going to develop arts and performing arts so people can find other ways to express themselves. Ballet instead of stripping.
Well, I want to speak to two things. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll come right behind you.
I want to speak to two things. One, I'm a mother of 4 sons and 4 grandsons. So, quickly on programs, we got plenty of programs for the girls. Where are programs for our boys? That's number one. So that was a struggle for me because my last son, I was able to put him in a 100 Black Men mentoring program, Blueprint to Success. And that turned out to be a very great thing for him and for me because for the majority of their lives, and my oldest son is 28 years old, I was a single mother. Again, because remember back when I said that I attracted unhealthy males, so who were not healthy, sensitive fathers to my sons, which left me to struggle along with them. And here I am, a broken young lady trying to figure out who I am, sexually and otherwise, and in front of these young men that I'm raising. And I speak to the point of my second son, our relationship for years was strained. And it's gotten better now over the last couple of years. But it was one of those situations where my son loved me, but there was a part of him that resented me. Because he's trying to understand, why is mama trying to chastise me for how I treat other ladies when I sit back and watch how she allowed the males in her life to treat her. The examples that I set before him, the times that I wasn't trying to, but I did. Children are in ear's length, so they hear our conversations. And I'm on the phone talking to his grandmother, his father's mother, and I'm emasculating. You know? And so when we talk about all this trauma and abuse and sexual assault against women and girls, and we go back and we talk about how a great deal of our males are the ones perpetrating, and we talk about underlying needs and really looking at the surface, I'm really going back and I'm reaching back for my sons every single day, not only to educate them, but to apologize and to help heal and to connect them to services, because I take responsibility for the fact that very much of the foundation of who they've become is based on my portion of parenting and the examples and the modeling that I set before them and what I taught them about women and how to treat them. And yes, my sons are very respectful, but I have one in particular that struggles in that area. And then I'm looking at my grandsons, and I'm trying to teach him how to change his behaviors and become a strong role model in his household, so he doesn't groom them intergenerationally to come up and do the same things. The protection, the 5 protective factors, how we protect them from every mechanism through educating them and connecting with them based on all the stuff they're going to come in contact with at school, social media, or in the household.
Well,
Can I? Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Doc.
Look, we will never surpass what we tolerate. And the reason why our young adults don't respect us now is because we haven't protected them. We haven't laid a roadmap for them. They're rebelling against the fact that we have not given them the infrastructure and how to operate. Young adults, and all my children are grown. My youngest is 30. My oldest is almost 40 now. Look, they don't listen to what we say. They adhere to what we do. And we need to go back. I always say, if you don't like the output, change the input. In our indigenous communities, this was not always like this. We had a circle of elders where our women were valued and prized, where our young adults were formed into manhood. We had manhood training. We had womanhood training. We had a whole complexity of processes that got our children to where they are and where they need to be. A male is born a male. He has to be formed and transformed into a man. That is a process. He goes from malehood to boyhood to manhood. Same thing with the women, and we've got to be humble enough to understand we need to reach out at times when we can't provide all the tools at the table. We're talking about sex trafficking. Most people don't even realize the cartels are involved in sex trafficking now. This is why sex trafficking is where it's at today, and this is why the people who are sex traffickers are so emboldened, because they know they have the cartels behind them and they have that firepower base. If our systems, sisters and young ladies and young men get caught up in that, we've got real work to do. I would say in closing on my end, we've got to have strategic planning sessions on an ongoing basis where we are designing protocol. We've got to give our people who are in these situations templates in terms of how to operate. We can't just expect a person who is dysfunctional, who is marginalized, and can't perceive the level of greatness that they stand for to waddle their way out of this. We've got to create that resiliency, that wherewithal, and most importantly, the directional blueprint to assist him and be there for him. Our communities are going to have to sacrifice. We got to put more work in. That's why I applaud you two sisters and what you're doing. But this whole table I applaud, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create that infrastructure where we can get these things done. But we got real work to do, and we better understand that.
I mean, and that's true, again, about when it comes to men. I know I talked about the way that we objectify women, but, you know, again, I'm going to show my age. The way our men dress today, right? I mean, in other words, I mean, which, you know, we go back to the whole idea of respect. And I think that basically we're losing, you know, and I agree with Doc, and I think that we talk about this quite often, is that, you know, our men in our community need to step up, because the problem is that we're not being, I mean, when you talked, that was a perfect point when you talked about the fact of you having a father there that's going to help guide you, and that makes a big difference, both in the issue of guiding our daughters and guiding our sons, because I mean, you know, and that's what the women in our community have always rode. They always been ride or die. We've never had a problem in the black community with women not being there. I was raised in a single parent household, right? And I was raised by a single mother who did an excellent job. I always say I got the best mother in the world. I mean, she was, you know, she rode with me. She did whatever she could. She, you know, she struggled, and that struggle has made me strong. But the one thing that we got to do in our community, you know, and I'm going to just put it out there, I mean, our men aren't taking care of their business. And that's been an issue. And you got, you know, until we get to a point where, and men teaching other young men the right way. You know what I mean? Being the example and showing other men, because that was another thing. I did have the advantage of having a grandfather who, you know, watching my grandfather love my grandmother taught me a lot. I don't know what impact that if I didn't see that, I don't know what would have happened to me. I have no idea. I can't say. But that was the thing that I loved the most. If he did nothing else, he loved my grandmother, and I saw that, and that is important. And when you start seeing men love their women and love their women the right way, then I think that you're going to start seeing that change. But when we talked about, I mean, whatever happened at the Million Man March, right? All those pledges that we had about not putting our hands on our women and taking care of our women, and we left that day, and it's almost like the pledge went away. So, my thing is always calling on the men to step up to the plate, because we're not protecting our women. That's why it's happening. You know what I mean? And so, that's really, to me personally, I think that may not be all of the solution, but man, that's a big issue. And I think if we start dealing with it that way, then I think that's something we can.
Yeah. And it's I got 1,001 things going through my head. I'm telling you, man. It's honestly, man, my head feel like it's about to explode right now because you know, just hearing everything, you know, we have work.
Yeah. Yes.
We have work, and you know, when we look at our youth, man. I mean, they being bombarded with all type of stuff, and I mean, it's confusing as it is, but I think it's more damn confusing now when they see all of this stuff, whether it be the rap music, whether it be the Kavanaugh case, whether it be the Cosby case, whether it be these priests, you know, because you know, I was listening to Ms. Webb, and she was talking about how if you don't understand trauma, you ain't gonna get it.
Thank you.
So they can go up there and they can talk on these judicial committees and all of this stuff, but the people that's asking the question, that's persecuting this lady, they not understanding, you know, what she went through. They don't understand trauma. They don't understand none of that, and they don't want to choose to. But you know, and then also I was listening to you how you said the dynamics had changed from the time that your stepfather killed your mother to what happened with OJ, and that changed, you know. And I think that same stuff is going on, but this is the stuff that our kids are ingesting down there. They're seeing this thing with the Cosby thing. Not saying that he's innocent or guilty, but when you look at the different groups that back the young ladies behind Cosby that pushed this issue, all these different organizations that pushed it, you don't see those same organizations pushing this about Kavanaugh. You know, so you see the difference between even with the priests. You don't see ain't nobody being convicted. You know. And the thing about it, this is the stuff that our children are seeing these days, man. And then they got the rap music, they got this stuff that they see. Look, the other day, what was it, yesterday? My kid told me something in the group setting. He said, you know, and I hope I'm able to use this, but this is just a learning experience. But he said, you know, there was a kid at my school and he did a pantsing. So we all looking like, what is a pantsing? You know? And he said a pantsing is when a guy runs up to a girl, he snatches down her pants. I said, what, in school? Say, yeah, in school. But then the other young lady in the group, she said, yeah, it all started because the young ladies was trying to stop the young men from sagging. So when they catch somebody sagging, they'll pull down their pants. But now it formed into a full-fledged epidemic amongst these middle schools where they pulling each other's pants down. This is abuse.
Can be construed as sexual assault.
Exactly. So I'm saying, man, we got work to do, and it starts, like you say, we got to go to that root, man. We got to get back to that root, and we got to start educating these youth and trying to interpret all the stuff that they ingest, whether it be the rap music, whether it be the stuff that they see on TV. We got to start teaching. We really got to teach.
I just personally feel like our men are the foundation.
Yes.
And when I think back on my life and the absenteeism or even the presence of a male in my life, it was all negative. I don't know what it is to have a grandfather, let alone a healthy sense of a father. And as a woman raising 4 sons, there was even a crossroad where I had to recognize that there was only so far that I could take my sons.
Teach, sister, teach.
That I needed
Real talk.
a man,
Real talk.
a healthy sense of a man to teach them the other side of who they are. And so I just really encourage, you know, our men to step up and help heal our other men so they can be positive influences and role models.
Okay. All right, man. I wish we had some more time. that really went fast. Even though we had a little extra time. But again, man, I appreciate Miss Lewis and Miss Webb. I appreciate you coming, and hopefully I can get you to come back again, because this is obviously something that we can actually talk about and kind of chime in on a little bit more. I want to also talk about the play that you have on October the 12th through the 14th. Where is it at?
It's at the Box Theater. It is located on Market Street, downtown Riverside. And that's where you probably know more about the Fox Theater. That's where they have concerts. The Box is part of the Fox. It's just a small venue. And we just love for people to come out to that event because of the fact it gives us opportunity to heal together.
And it's going to be at 7 p.m. And what's the name of the play again?
The play is called... Oh my gosh, I just feel so straight right now. Okay, where's my play called? I know what it's called. Hey, nowhere to run.
Okay, and it's on the NAACP website.
Yes, it is in Riverside.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm a few hours of sleep.
All right, again, All right, thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. And on behalf of the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir, we'll see you next week at the same time, same place, and same channel. And until next week, stay blessed.
Payback! Again! I'm mad to get down with my girlfriend. That ain't right.
KCAA. Are you occasionally stressed?